the Town of Cary's Government Access Channel.
We will call to order the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Board for December 18th. We begin, of course, with our agenda. If anyone has any changes to the agenda, would you bring them up? Otherwise, I would be looking for a motion to adopt our agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the agenda say aye, please. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. We have two sets of minutes to discuss. The first are the minutes for the meeting of November 27th, and we also have the meeting for November 13th. Does anyone have any changes or amendments to either set of minutes? We'll take those both collectively today. If not, one motion to approve both would be acceptable.
So moved.
Do I have a second for that?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting them, or of approving the minutes for both November 27 and 13 say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously as well. We have but one case this evening, and it's a substantial case, so we will get right to it. It is 17 REZ 14, the Fenton Mixed Use Development Rezoning. Before we do that, we have one of our board members would like to say something.
Yeah, I have a brief statement that I need to make. I've learned that one of the applicants on tonight's agenda is represented by the law firm Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein. My wife, Renee, is a partner with that firm. She has had no involvement with any of the applications or the Fenton rezoning application. She nor I stand to gain anything from the approval or denial of the Fenton rezoning application. I've been advised by the town attorney that there is no conflict of interest in my participation in consideration of the Fenton application. However, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm asking that this statement be included in the minutes of the Cary Planning and Zoning Board. So,
Thank you. That will be included, and we are ready to begin with this case. We will hear first from one of our staff members, Mr. Overton, and I'm sure we'll have a few more staff members come up before we're finished. Good evening.
Good evening, PNC Board. I'm excited to be before you tonight. Actually, this is my first time formally, I guess, before you tonight. So excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this community-defining project in our Eastern Cary Gateway. So does everybody remember this document? Not just because I bought a stack of them at your session. But most of you, if you're on the board over the last year, you should remember this document because you guys spent a lot of time in it about a year ago as we approach our one-year anniversary of its adoption. The reason I bring this tonight is because this plan will really be the focal point of our discussion tonight. So when I was before you at your November work session, I got the sense that there was some concern over the effort that goes into getting a plan in front of you. And I say that because tonight, especially with this project, we really want you to get a sense and feel what's gone into this proposal to get it ready for you tonight so that you can have a consideration of a recommendation. Oops. All right, so as you know, the council vision for Imagine Cary is to continue to be a model of a highly regarded and well-planned community. This is certainly a community-defining project and one that has merited more opportunities for public input with a public hearing tonight, as well as required more hard work from the council and staff to get us to this point. And the key question for you tonight, is the proposed rezoning consistent with the vision for the Eastern Cary Gateway and our Imagine Cary plan? And you're going to hear this theme throughout tonight's presentation. And to kind of get you there, you'll hear from staff who will describe three key aspects of consistency with our vision and plan. And they are land use, intensity, and design. So as mentioned, it's taken many months of hard work and meetings, weekly discussions with the developers and their team, and even a trip to Georgia, which some of these pictures are coming up on your monitors, as you've seen when we went there. We went to Georgia to see other mixed-use sites, and that got us here tonight. But it's become more and more evident as we've worked harder that a project of this size and scope merits a different level of involvement by all. Again, some pictures of staff as we've been in our meetings and our groups. So before we get started, let's take a quick look back to see how we got here. And that really started on January 24th with the adoption of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, again, that a lot of you put hard work into. That culminated in really 3 years worth of work before that. There was a neighborhood meeting for the project on July the 12th. Some of you may have attended. We had the mixed use, as mentioned, development site visit with council staff and even the developers of Fenton and the mall projects. Coming back out of that on August the 22nd, we had a council recap as part of a work session and where we talked about priorities and guidance of the council for this project. There was the initial public hearing on November the 2nd, and then that was continued as another opportunity to hear public comment on November the 16th. And after that, we had on December the 5th, another council work session to talk about just the Fenton project, and several of you were there, and thank you for attending that meeting. So now what to expect moving forward? Obviously, we're here tonight, December the 18th. It's yet another opportunity for citizen input before your consideration and recommendation. And then ultimately, this will be going to a council public hearing for a development agreement with this project that you'll probably hear a little bit more about tonight, and followed by council action. So with that, thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing your recommendation, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rob Wilson of our planning department to guide you through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning Board members. We are excited, as Russ said, to bring this rezoning request to you tonight. The reason we're excited is because this is a very important location. So 92 acres of undeveloped land at an interstate interchange, greenfield development. Cary only has a half a dozen interstate interchanges, and the majority of them are already developed. So a site of this size next to the interstate is very unique. In the lifespan of a municipality, you don't come across sites like this very often. So this is a rare opportunity where something very special could happen. What makes this site special? It's only a mile from downtown Cary, which is another special planning area for the town. It's also next to Wake Med Soccer Park, which hosts national level soccer and cross-country events. Being adjacent to an Interstate 40 interchange makes the site very accessible to Raleigh, Durham, and the airport. It's just over 6 miles from downtown Raleigh, which means there are also several colleges and universities nearby. Basically, it's a site with fantastic regional access. It's also across the street from an existing mall and a national caliber aquatic facility, all located on a major gateway corridor into town. Fortunately, the important characteristics of this area were recognized in developing the Imagine Cary Community Plan, which was adopted earlier this year. The site was included as part of the 800-acre Eastern Cary Gateway Special Planning Area, which extends from Chapel Hill Road south to Walnut Street. The subject property is identified as Area 1, which is in the center of the Eastern Cary Gateway Special Planning Area, the orange area that you see with the one in the middle of it. The site's identified as an employment-based mixed-use center, which, I quote from the plan, is an appropriate location for high-density, intensive employment uses mixed with supportive commercial and residential uses. The Cary Community Plan vision is quickly becoming a reality in this portion of the Gateway area. In October, the council approved a rezoning for a major retailer, presumed to be IKEA, that will be the first step in redeveloping the aging mall on the opposite side of Carytown Boulevard. And a second rezoning request on the mall site is underway, one that will hopefully continue the process of transforming that property and helping achieve the community's vision for this greater area. So the consideration of a rezoning request for this property is an opportunity to continue that momentum and create synergy between these developments while helping the overall Eastern Cary Gateway area move towards the vision articulated in the Imagine Cary Community Plan. So now that we know the site is special and the community plan envisions great things here, what is the rezoning proposing for this site? The answer is office, commercial, and retail uses, all as part of a vertically integrated mixed-use development. If the project builds out to the maximum amount of development proposed, it would have the office space equivalent to 5 MetLife office buildings. The number of dwellings would be similar to the total number of dwelling units in the Silverton or in the Oxford Hunt planned unit developments. And the retail space would be just shy of the floor area in 2 Waverly Places, with multiple community gathering areas integrated throughout the project. The difference is that it would be exciting to see all of these uses vertically mixed. As proposed, the rezoning would effectively provide the ability to live, work, and play all in one place, and we really do not have anything comparable in Cary today. So how is this development proposing to be accomplished? The site's currently zoned office institutional with a 60-foot strip that's zoned resource recreation along the western property line and a portion of the northern property line. This current zoning was established in 1984. The proposed zoning for the site is mixed-use district, or MXD. A required component of this district is the preparation and submittal of a preliminary development plan, which is often referred to as a PDP. The preliminary development plan that you will see tonight has evolved through a number of iterations over the last 2 years. What began with 2 big box tenants and a few office buildings surrounded by a sea of parking has evolved dramatically. Staff provided feedback through these iterations, emphasizing the importance of this area as a gateway destination center and the opportunities offered by such a large greenfield site located near an interstate interchange. In particular, the staff encouraged greater intensity as well as the integration of vertical mixing of uses. Along the way, the Eastern Cary Gateway Special Planning Area and the Community Plan were adopted as part of the Imagine Cary process. The applicants responded to the staff's encouragement, and following the adoption of the Imagine Cary Community Plan in January, they brought forward a proposal centered around an L-shaped Main Street with vertically mixed uses and the potential for several office towers. The applicant has continued to work with staff to revise details and tweak conditions as part of moving through the review process en route to the Planning and Zoning Board meeting this evening. So how do we make sure that the applicant's vision is achieved with the rezoning? It all starts with the preliminary development plan and the conditions included as part of this plan. This development is so important that the developer has offered approximately 100 zoning conditions. These conditions are reflected in the notes, tables, and charts that are included on the preliminary development plan. Collectively, these conditions translate into the site design and layout that's shown on the plan. While these words give guidance during development plan to achieve what is shown on the plan, it is the plan itself that represents the uses, the intensity, and the design that is proposed to be implemented if the rezoning is approved. We'd like to take a few minutes and give you an overview of some of the major issues that have been addressed so you can have a sense of the depth and thought that's been invested in this proposal. So let's quickly run through the highlights. First, the plan proposes to regulate the amount of development that can be built on the site. Minimums and maximums are provided for each type of land use. In this case, there are also limits on the number of large tenants, and no traditional drive-throughs are allowed. The applicant is proposing performance objectives to ensure that a mix of uses is being built from the beginning of the project. So although the project has the ability to be predominantly retail in the very first phase, non-retail uses are still required from the beginning. Also, the project would transition from a minimum of approximately 25% non-retail in the first phase to approximately 30% non-retail in the next phase. From this point forward, the project quickly becomes predominantly non-retail uses. Access and circulation is organized around 4 street segments. You've got the existing Trinity Road that goes up to Walnut Creek, Trinity Road Extension, which will provide a connection to East Chatham Street, completing a north-south access between Cary Town and Chatham. Kennard Road will provide east-west access along the northern edge of the site and stub out to the western property line. And a new north-south collector roadway along the western boundary of the project is proposed that will intersect with Kennard. Street side trails are proposed along Cary Town Boulevard on the western side of Trinity Road up to the Walnut Creek Bridge. And a greenway is also proposed to be constructed along Walnut Creek. This would be the Iron Gate Greenway according to the town's master plan. Bicycle accommodations are proposed to be provided along Cary Town Boulevard and the portion of Trinity Road that's south of Walnut Creek, and details would be determined during development plan review. In terms of traffic, a traffic study was performed. 23 intersections within a mile of the property were analyzed. 15 of those were recommended for improvements, and the applicant is making the improvements at 13 of the 15 intersections. Since the traffic study was done, the applicant has increased the amount of development program in order to increase the project's conformance with the vision in the Imagine Cary community plan. As a result, the proposed amount of development does exceed what was modeled. However, as part of the MXD rezoning, the applicant has asked for a modification from the normal land development ordinance requirements in order to have permission to build up to the maximum development program as part of this rezoning proposal. The site does have significant topography. To create flat building pads and meet ADA requirements will require a lot of earth to be moved to create large flat areas. A large amount of grading means there will be a lot of tree removal. And the applicant, therefore, is requesting permission to clear and grade the 30-foot streetscape buffers on Cary Town Boulevard and Trinity Road. In exchange for this modification, the applicant is offering additional zoning conditions, including limiting the height of retaining walls to a maximum of 10 feet, using higher quality materials for retaining walls, and installing larger than required trees. While the rezoning before you tonight commits to providing vertically integrated development, it also includes a commitment to a higher level of architectural design and landscaping that exceeds town standards. A design guidebook is proposed as a condition to achieve this commitment. The purpose of the design guidebook is to establish and make this commitment to a higher level of quality and a greater caliber of design than required by the town's existing architectural standards. The guidebook supports this goal by identifying specific elements that will be incorporated into the project and utilizing pictures to convey the type, character, and relationship of these elements. It's important to note that the expectation is not that the actual project will be a duplication of what is represented in these photos. Variability and flexibility will be promoted as part of creating a unique sense of place, as long as the reflected higher level of quality and caliber of design are achieved. As far as implementation, the proposed architecture and design will be reviewed to make sure that it's substantially similar to the elements and characteristics identified in this guidebook. The guidebook specifically provides guidance for a large number of elements, including but not limited to architecture and building design, parking structure design and screening, the village lanes, including elements such as hardscape, furnishings, screening and lighting, landscaping throughout the project, including streets and medians, gathering spaces, both the character and type of potential amenities, and signage, where modifications are proposed to relax regulations in the village core and at the site's primary entrance. As development plans are reviewed, each of these areas will be reviewed to determine whether or not the proposed features are substantially similar to the envisioned level of quality and design. In order to have greater flexibility and creativity regarding conditions and requirements for the project, the developers propose to enter into a development agreement with the town. For example, a development agreement could provide the opportunity for the town to get certain uses, such as office, faster than may occur otherwise. Such agreements can also help address issues that may be beyond the control or scope of a single development. In this case, the applicant has proposed a condition that no development plans would be approved unless there is a valid development agreement and the development plans are in conformance with that agreement. We have received feedback at multiple public meetings, generally with regards to the following topics: phasing, the future alignment of Trinity Road, the I-40 interchange, a potential pedestrian bridge across Cary Town Boulevard, the potential number of new residents and jobs, the impact on the adjacent neighborhood to the west, highway noise, tree protection, affordable housing, stormwater, and the potential impact on the redevelopment of Cary Town Center. Several speakers have also expressed general support of the proposal. There have been several minor changes to the preliminary development plan since the initial public hearing with the Town Council on November 2nd. Perhaps most notable are revisions that the applicant has made to their phasing conditions. The applicant is now proposing that a minimum of approximately 25 to 30% of each phase of development will be vertically integrated non-retail uses. These conditions apply until 775,000 square feet of development has occurred, at which point the majority of the retail use has been built and the developer would have flexibility regarding build-out. At this time, I'd like to introduce Senior Planner Mary Bierman, who's going to further discuss the proposal before you this evening.
Thank you, Rob. So as was mentioned earlier in the presentation tonight, your deliberation should be guided by this question. Is the proposed rezoning consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan, and more specifically, the vision for the Eastern Cary Gateway? So what does the plan call for in this area? The site makes up Area 1 in the Eastern Cary Gateway Special Planning Area, and this is one of 5 destination centers that are recognized in the Cary Community Plan. Area 1 is set out to be a high-density, mixed-use center with a mix of office, commercial, and residential units, and it should include a significant amount of employment opportunities. In order to achieve this, there are guidelines for how much of each of these uses should be included, with office use ultimately making up the highest percentage. Guidelines for the overall site design are also spelled out in the plan. The area is envisioned as an attractive and inviting gateway into the destination center with a vertical mix of uses that includes building heights up to 15 stories. It should also incorporate functional, active open space and gathering areas, and include structured parking to minimize the use of surface parking lots. So in evaluating the request for consistency with this vision of the Eastern Cary Gateway, there are 3 key aspects to keep in your consideration, and that is the land use, the intensity of use, and the design. So how does the plan address the land use and intensity aspects of the plan? First, it will contain 2 to 3 million square feet of building area. There are minimum and maximum area requirements for each of these key land use categories, and the use mix falls within the targeted ranges that are laid out in the plan. The core of the development is a vertically integrated area with a strong design emphasis, and phasing conditions will ensure vertical integration from the very first phase. Office buildings are proposed that range from 4 to 14 stories in height, and there are 8 parking decks that are integrated throughout the site. Site design guidelines focus primarily around aesthetics and mobility. There is a detailed design guidebook that will be used to review architectural design as well as a wide variety of site details and features. There are also road improvements and extensions, namely Trinity Road, Quinter Drive, and a new north-south connector. A traffic study was done and improvements are offered at 13 intersections. Accommodation is made for bike and pedestrian access through greenway, street side trails, and the road design itself. Accommodations are made for future transit stops and also for a potential pedestrian bridge across Carytown Boulevard. So after extensive review and refinement of various iterations of this development plan as it has gone through a review process, staff does recommend approval of the rezoning case. And we base that on consistency with the vision that's laid out in the Eastern Cary Gateway portion of the Cary Community Plan with regard to the land use, intensity, and design. So we're now ready for the applicant's comments and the public hearing. And following the public hearing, staff would like to make a few closing comments as well before you begin your discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I had neglected earlier to discuss our ground rules for the public hearing. We will hear from the applicant, who will have 10 minutes to speak with us. When the applicant is done, they will actually be the first speaker in the public hearing. Then it will be open to the House. I'd appreciate you coming down and speaking at the left podium, not the one with the TV monitor, but the one that has the little little three lights on it, red, yellow, green. You'll be green for your first 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Your last 30 seconds will be yellow, and then when that thing is red, we're going to wrap you up pretty quickly, just so everyone gets a chance to have the same 5 minutes. Please provide a card to our clerk that'll give your name and other information that we require, and I would appreciate you beginning with your name when you come to speak with us. I don't see a big group here, so I won't do any of the have a representative business or any of that other stuff. I think we can expedite this fairly quickly. So unless I missed an important detail, we will begin hearing from the applicant as we open our public hearing. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Evangelista, and good evening to the members of the board. My name is Jamie Schwadler with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Columbia Development. We're very excited to bring the Fenton project to you today, and I really want to thank staff and begin there with the thorough review of this project that they've described. I know you've all heard a lot about it, but I can't emphasize enough the amount of labor and intensity that they went into with helping us move this project from where it was over a year ago when it was submitted to where it is before you today. And that is definitely a result of their hard work, the weekly meetings that they invested in, and the detailed and extensive comments that they provided throughout. What you saw was just a fraction of a summary of what they've done, and I think we really are in a better place for their comments, so I thank them very much. This project, as Mr. Wilson said, is really like none other in Cary. The size and the scope, the quality of the development, and the mix of what we're trying to bring is really a project that will bring that work-life balance into fruition. And you really can go play, work, and live all in one place with a dynamic, very motivated area in which employers will be attracted, and we believe that that will drive the catalyst of this area that will raise not just our site, but also the mall site and the other sites within the Eastern Cary Gateway. Part of the elements that you heard tonight are going to be designed to promote that dense, walkable hub that not only allows the connectivity that Ms. Bierman spoke to, but also draws people in and gives them a place to stay. We're creating a sense of place that they don't just come to live, they don't just come to work, but they come to shop and they come invest their tax dollars in Cary, and really come not just from the area, but all throughout the Triangle and the state. To do this, as Mr. Wilson mentioned, this project is a little bit different than what you might have seen before. We do have the PDP, which you've seen in numerous other cases, but we have an extensive list of committed elements that the staff has reviewed, and we also have this design guidebook. And what that will do is enable the staff, as this goes forward, to compare our development plans to numerous pages of elements and committed elements and building design and determine whether they're substantially similar to what you see and approve tonight or recommend going forward to the council. And what we believe that will do for Cary is ensure this higher level of quality and design and really bring the Eastern Cary Gateway into fruition from just a plan to an active setting. The scale and the size that Mr. Wilson mentioned is truly unlike anything that Cary has seen before, and that's why the special process and the details of the design guidebook are necessary. What he didn't mention is that they've also had the added help of an outside design consultant that's been advising the town staff throughout the process, and so you have the added benefit of not just our input, not just the staff's input, but a very well-respected architect in the area that has put fine attention and detail into every step along the way. In addition to what Ms. Bierman mentioned on the building committed elements table, there's a lot to soak in there, but what you really need to take away is, as they mentioned, is this intensity, is this use, is this mix of uses what the council envisioned and the town staff envisioned when they went through this huge collaborative process of the Eastern Cary Gateway. And we hope that by looking through these design elements tonight and the unique elements that we're bringing to the table, you'll agree with us that the project really is what is to bring this area to life, and that Fenton, the name of the project, can finally envision and carry through the vision of the Eastern Cary Gateway that the council has envisioned on every step. So we look forward to bringing this gateway to the eastern part of Cary. We're here and happy to answer any questions, and we look forward to hopefully getting your recommendation for approval to move forward to council tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now open the public hearing to anyone who wishes to speak to us.
Good evening, Chair Evangelista and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, 421 Fayetteville Street, Suite 530, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27601. I spend way more time in Cary than I do in Raleigh. I have a hard time remembering my own address because of it. Pleasure to be here tonight. We have provided, here on behalf of CBL Properties, the owners of Cary Town Center across the street from this very important site, not only to the town, but also to the region as a whole. It's a dynamic opportunity for everybody involved, and it's one of those sites that the town council has said for years, we got to make sure we get it right. I mean, that has been a recurring theme at the council table with respect to this specific site. We got to make sure we get it right, and a lot of time, effort, and energy has obviously gone into developing this plan that's before you tonight. And if that gets delivered, everyone's a winner. I mean, the plan. The Fenton concept at full build-out is a winner. As CBL has expressed at the public hearing prior to the town council's workshop, CBL has concerns associated with how the project is phased and what impact that will have on redevelopment efforts at the mall, as was alluded to. You all are aware IKEA recently was approved by the town, and the site plan was actually submitted earlier this month. And we are looking at a February public hearing for the Phase 2 redevelopment efforts at Cary Town Center, and obviously CBL wants to make sure that the time, effort, and energy that's invested in that process is one that will ultimately work out for CBL, work out for the property across the street, as well as work out for the town. First, I just want to make a comment about the process. This particular process, and maybe through no fault of anybody in particular, it has been kind of tough to keep up with. It feels like there's a lot of this proposal that has been eking out through the process, that the conditions are still on the fly a little bit, and this is a huge project. And actually, as recently as today, I was told by a member of the staff that the conditions have changed even since you all's staff report was prepared and published online. So it's tough for us to keep up with and really understand what is being proposed as part of this project. Again, not a criticism of anybody in particular. It's a complicated project, but it makes it tough as a landowner across the street. It makes it tough for CBL to really digest and understand what is being proposed and how it impacts them. However, based upon the information that we have available to us, and I don't know how complete it is, but I'm going to assume the information that is available online is complete, CBL continues to have significant concerns associated with the vast amount of retail that is part of this project in the early stages. And no disrespect to the planning department's expertise associated with their recommendation of approval, but based upon the recommendations of the Cary Community Plan, I don't see how the phasing of this project supports a recommendation of approval. I don't see how the phasing of this project is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. The Cary Community Plan designated this area, and Rob mentioned it, designated this property as the employment-based mixed-use center with, and I think the exact language was, supportive commercial and residential uses. The first phase of this development is 210,000 square feet of retail and 25% non-retail. So you're talking about 75% of the project is going to be retail as part of phase 1, even though the Cary Community Plan clearly says this is the employment-based mixed-use center. The numbers that Rob shared tonight is that at 775,000 square feet of total build-out, the non-retail component is up to 30%, but then the retail component is 70%. And I was trying to do some quick math, and I went to law school for a reason. The way I understand those numbers to be is that at 750,000 square feet of build-out, you're going to have 543,000 square feet of retail and 232,000 square feet of non-retail. There's no guarantee that any uses beyond those will be developed on the site. I don't see how, if the recommendation is that this is the employment-based mixed-use center, and that 40 to 60% of the uses on that site are supposed to be employment-based, and only 20 to 40% are to be retail, I don't see how you can have a project that only guarantees that we're going to do 70% retail and 30% non-retail. I don't see how that is consistent with the recommendations of the Cary Community Plan. And so, again, we are here to continue to express our concerns associated with the large amount of retail that's being suggested for the site. The mall has long been the retail center of the Eastern Cary Gateway. The Cary Community Plan recognizes it in that fashion, and we would ask for you all to pay close attention to how that phasing occurs and ensure that this is the employment-based mixed-use center. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak to the public hearing this evening? Just a hand wave, standing up? Nope, nothing? Well, that was a very brief public hearing, and I will go ahead and close it. We will now bring our staff members up and begin to ask questions of them. I'll start on the right-hand side. Oh, you wanted to have some
I just
comments
add
first.
one-
That's correct. I'm
One
sorry.
additional comment that
My
I would
apology.
like to note, just to give some context with some other aspects we've touched on, is to note that the vision for this site will be achieved primarily through the preliminary development plan and the rezoning that's the focus of the discussion tonight. But in addition to that, there will be a development agreement, and then there are other initiatives of the Cary Community Plan that are implemented at a scale and a scope that is beyond that of any individual development in this area when you look at some of the major infrastructure needs for the larger area. And that these components will build upon this rezoning. The rezoning establishes the essence of the development on this property, but there are other things that will contribute and add to that in fully achieving the vision for the entire gateway ultimately. So I just wanted to point out for context. So it has been a long process to get here. There's been a lot of information presented to you tonight, a lot of information in your staff report, a lot of history for how we got here. So now it's time for your deliberation and consideration of, again, of whether or not this rezoning is consistent with the vision that's laid out for this portion of the Eastern Cary Gateway in the Cary Community Plan. Again, focusing on the key aspects of land use, intensity, and design. And with that, staff is available for questions.
Thank you very much. So as you've heard, there's oodles of conditions in here, and we're being asked to look at this more as a holistic view of the use. So I don't anticipate we'll be taking each and every condition list by list. But however you want to go about asking your questions of the staff, there's no rhyme nor reason at this moment. We'll just let it organically figure out how we're going to go ahead and do it. And I'll start on the far right, and we'll just ask our questions.
I know that we are looking to revitalize that area, and I like the way that, I like the vision that we have here. Is there anything that you know in this plan that goes against the Imagine Cary plan? Is there something that's blatantly obvious that I'm not seeing?
Well, I think that as we have gone through the process, when you go back to 2015, when we looked at the very first plan that came forward even before the project was submitted, and we've been working with this developer, and the initial proposals that were laid out and the visions were not in keeping with the plan. So we, over this 2-year period, we have continued to work with that. So we feel at this point that the issues that were not satisfying the plan have been resolved and worked through. So we do feel, confident that in looking at the big issues of the land use, the intensity, the design, putting all of that together for how that works within this area, that staff does believe that it meets the vision of the plan.
I think as a destination center, that is what I would think it would
Yes.
look like. I'm good.
Any questions?
Yeah, a couple of questions, if I could. I know we didn't want to get into conditions, and I'm not going to do a deep dive into that, but I do have one question about the champion tree condition. And as I looked at the map of where the champion trees were located, and maybe I'm misreading the map, but it looked like, they mentioned that the champion trees were identified on sheet number 2 that was listed. It looked like a lot of those champion trees, and I may misread or misinterpreted the drawing, that a lot of them looked like they were in the stream buffer. And so I'm wondering if champion trees are in a stream buffer, why they would need to be removed. That's just a question.
Yes, there are quite a few champion trees on the site. The ones that are in the stream buffer are being proposed to be preserved.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact number, whether it's 18 or 21 there, but it's in your staff report, the number of them that are not in stream buffers that are in the area that would be cleared
16.
and graded. 16?
16.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, but there are several more beyond the 16 that are being preserved, and a lot of those are in the stream buffers.
That was a question. Another question I had is, and this is just out of curiosity, when you look at the site, as you look at the southern end of it, there's a triangular piece that comes down right before the exit there. Is that part of the Cary, the Wake Med Soccer Park property? I'm just curious as to, it's almost like this outlier piece, and I don't have a slide number.
Are you
Yeah, it'd be.
over here?
Yeah, there's a piece over there.
So that is part of the state property, but that is not part of this proposal.
Okay, but that's part of the state land over there.
Correct.
I was just curious what was going on there. In the residential units, those are all multifamily units that are being proposed, the 600 to 920 units?
Yes, that's our understanding.
Okay.
Kind of apartments or condos, that type of
Apartment condos, and is the
dwelling.
intent that they're going to be, what, Class A plus? Did they?
The office space?
No, the apartments.
We don't have information as to the marketing or the pricing, related to those units.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Fine.
I have a couple questions. My first question is around the phasing of the project. And I'm just wondering if one of you guys could kind of give a little more context of how that phasing is actually going to work. And specifically, the way I read it is that at the end of the second phase, 1/3 is going to be non-retail. I believe that was in the staff report. Looking at the preliminary development plan chart, though, it appears that the metrics are a bit more in the non-residential use. So I'm wondering if maybe there's additional phases or how exactly we're going to get to that minimum build-out.
So the phasing is, and maybe it's worth taking a moment since that seems to be yes, what about phasing? Let's talk a little bit about phasing. So what staff has been seeking to accomplish with phasing is to make sure that we get a mix of uses and that we get non-retail uses from the beginning, and that there's some flexibility for the developer. The developer's been very clear with staff that it is the large box you see closest to Carytown Boulevard, which is presumed at this point to be a Wegmans, that it is that box, is that retailer, is the income generated from that transaction that helps them get the project going, enables them to begin and move on down the village lane. So the phasing is something that we have continued to talk about with the applicant since the council work session, because it was something that was brought up there. And they have looked to further refine the phasing conditions beyond what you have in your staff report. So I will update you on that if you'd like, and try to be very quick about it. Sure. Make sure we're using the terminology correctly here, because it's important. We have two things. We have the mix of uses, so that's how much non-retail you have. And non-retail is office, residential, hospitality, hotel, public, institutional uses, research laboratories. Retail is the commercial uses that are identified on the preliminary development plan. There's a chart, list them all out. So that's retail, and these are all the things that could be non-retail. We've been looking to make sure that there's non-retail present from the beginning, and in addition, that there's vertically integrated non-retail present from the beginning. You could have non-retail on a ground floor, but in this case, we've been looking two different kind of numbers, and then I'll walk you through more of what that means. Two different goals we're trying to satisfy. So here is where we currently are at. This is the latest proposal as it relates to the applicant and phasing. And there are a lot of numbers here, but if you just walk through the first phase with me, I'll explain what it means. So they have to build a minimum of 60,000 square feet of non-retail in the first phase. When they hit that 60,000 square feet with their first phase, their first development plan they bring us, they have the ability to do up to 210,000 square feet of retail. Now, 125,000 of that is the big box for the Wegmans. Some of that is the ground floor that's underneath the 60,000 square feet of non-retail that's in the first column. So if they build the maximum amount of retail, the minimum amount of non-retail, you've got 270,000 square feet. They're around 22.5%, 23%, close to a quarter non-retail. Over on the right, you can see the purple number is the amount of that non-retail that has to be vertically integrated, has to be on a second, third, fourth floor, whatever. So the second phase, they have to provide at least 100,000 square feet of non-retail. That gives them the ability to do another 20,000 square feet of retail. These are cumulative numbers, so you don't add. The 210, you add 20,000 to that, and you get to 230. So they can get a little more retail. They build 40,000 square feet of non-retail, they can have another 20,000 square feet of retail. You can see the new total. That 100,000 square feet of non-retail all has to be vertically integrated. Now, they can do more than that, but they can't do one more square foot than the retail, the maxed retail in the column. Now, the third phase is close. The second and third phases are very close. There are a couple of different buildings. They're trying to keep the ability to go either way. They could move through this sequentially in order. These are tiers that they have to hit. They have to hit the minimums to be able to get the retail and grow the project. They could go from phase 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, or they could build phase 1 and jump to phase 4, as long as they achieve the minimums that you see. And let's look at phase 4, because at that point you'll notice that the minimum amount of non-retail, 340,000 square feet, only 175,000 of that has to be vertically integrated. What that's doing, that opens it up for residential. There are some buildings, not on the village lane itself, but the tier behind them, where you'll have residential to the ground floor. Not a vertically integrated building, you may have office as well. It allows those buildings to begin to enter the equation. And as you can see at that point, at the fourth phase, or the fourth tier, the amount of non-retail is now exceeding the amount of retail. So the development would no longer be predominantly retail at that point. And the development continues. You can see that with the fifth tier, you've got 450,000 square feet. There's the 775,000 that was mentioned earlier. And you can see that only 325,000 of that, less than half, is retail. And of the 450 that's non-retail, at least 230, almost half of it, a little over half of it, would have to be vertically integrated. So that vertically integrated piece exists from the very beginning. Non-retail uses exist from the very beginning, and they grow. They get over the hump with the Wegmans, and it becomes more of a traditional mix of uses as it builds down the village lane.
Gotcha. Now, I appreciate the details. Just to confirm, what you have labeled here is the fifth phase.
Yes.
That would have the development built out to the minimum, correct? At that point in time, the developer has achieved the minimum build out for the conditions. Or is
no.
there still?
There's still development beyond this. There's 1.2 million square feet of office. There's 575,000 square feet of retail. There are up to 920 residential units. There's over 2 million square feet here, so there's more development to occur. But a lot of the remaining buildings are either all residential, office towers, or they're vertically mixed with retail on the ground floor, and they haven't been built yet. So by the time they get to the fifth phase, these scenarios account for the larger independent retail pieces already having been built and being out of the equation, of which there are a few, the Wegmans building, the big box building being the primary one. So.
Okay. No, I appreciate the detail. That makes sense. I do have two transportation-related questions.
Go ahead and ask,
I'm
and
gonna
we'll
take
figure
those.
out who to bring.
The first one is in regard to the temporary road status of Trinity Boulevard. A little background about why the decision's made to make that a temporary road, and just kind of curious what exactly a temporary road entails. Does that mean eventually that portion of Trinity Road is going to be removed and replaced with a different portion? Is it going to be expanded upon? I guess what's the overall goal and strategy for that?
So let me make sure that we understand the question. Are you referring to this portion that exists today?
No, I'm referring to the temporary portion that's going to be completed as part of this.
The temporary portion?
Yes.
Yes, so the applicant is proposing to build a two-lane cross-section to provide access to Chatham. At this time, there's been a lot of discussion, and this is something that the town has just embarked on a study. It's one of the major initiatives from the community plan that was mentioned. And so the town is going to be working with other stakeholders to figure out what is the ultimate corridor for that. And that's something that will probably get addressed in the development agreement as to whether that gets built as a temporary or perhaps the permanent full-term alignment is sorted out.
Okay, I gotcha. That's really what I needed. And then my last question is in regard to the traffic mitigation, or the traffic study. One of the mitigations that was proposed was a mitigation for the Carytown Boulevard, the western approach lanes. And I'm just wondering, I guess one of the applicant's justifications for not pursuing that was the lack of right-of-way. I'm just wondering how much right-of-way is available were the applicant to pursue those mitigation efforts.
The right-of-way along Carytown Boulevard varies. It's between 260 and 290 feet. So we believe that the right-of-way does exist, that improvement could be made.
Okay. All right. That's all my questions.
I like to work my way from the outside in, so we'll.
Thank you. Just one question and a couple comments when that's appropriate. The one gentleman mentioned that the change was made today. Are you allowed to share what that is?
Actually, it was the phasing that we tweaked. We worked with them, and they proposed to update the condition on Friday.
Okay.
So, and I've now walked you through, with the table, I've walked you through that. It's just a revising of the existing phasing condition, but it is important. They're seeking to respond, to a concern that, has come up with the council.
Victor?
This is a wonderful plan, and congratulations to Ms. Bierman for being recognized as the Employee of the Year, Town of Cary. You herded a lot of cats to get this to where it is today, so my hat off to you. Let me ask a couple questions. Let me start first with one started probably by Mr. McFarland's comment. So there's 600 to 900 residential units of all flavors that are going to be potentially built here. I didn't want to go into the details and the weeds here on this, but I didn't see any mention of anything that might be considered as affordable housing consistent with government guidelines and or age restricted. So is that someplace in the 900 units, or at least a few? Because this wonderful concept here is going to certainly have a number of people who are working in retail, working on the landscaping, working other sorts of things that might benefit from that. So is there some portion that it's going to be set aside for that I didn't see?
I know that the applicant has considered the possibility of looking to address senior populations, but there is no condition that relates to age-based or affordability-based housing.
Oh, really?
I would note that the Eastern Cary Gateway area includes over 800 acres. So there are other areas to develop that would be appropriate for residential uses, among other uses, not getting into some of the area that's immediately around the Eastern Cary Gateway area. So, but to directly answer the question, there is no condition that addresses that.
Well, it's an important part of our policies with regard to live and variety of housing. 900 units seem to be I'm surprised. This is like a missed opportunity, at least for some small portion to be considered there, but that's just my view. So I'm surprised here it's 0. Let me continue on. Mr. McFarland also started this one about the 16 trees. So as this whole project is phased, and I know the plan and layout right now are still more conceptual, those things will go through adjustments and tweaks, and there's 33 buildings being proposed right now, which is incredible, but they're going to go through some modifications over time. And I'm just wondering if the current plan right now, as it's sort of a conceptual one, could in any way have any accommodation for reassessing as you go some of the champion trees without a priori, they're all gone, because once that's agreed on, they're all gone. I mean, is there any flexibility here with regard as the plans emerge? Maybe we look at it on a case-by-case basis. Do you have that flexibility as you go through the development plan here after we perhaps approve the rezoning?
To some extent, let me give you just a little bit of context. The staff, when this first came to staff, we had the same thought. Surely there must be some better way to save some of these champion trees. And then we looked at the actual topography on the site, and there's almost 70 feet of fall. It's It's kind of got a saddle ridge form in the middle, and then it drops down towards Carytown Boulevard, and it drops down towards the creek, and there's 70 feet of fall. And when you create large building pads and you have to try to average 5% slopes for ADA compliance, it's very hard to make up that kind of grade. And they shared some preliminary grading exercises with us, and we realized that it's just not possible to create this form, this intensity of development on a site to create. I mean, as you look at the picture here, looking down the village lane here at Avalon that's in front of you, it's running at about I think a 4 or 5% slope. But it looks fairly flat, and that's the way it needs to be. So when you look at the topographical constraints on this site, we came to the conclusion that it's just not doable. And to avoid having to truck large amounts of dirt off the site and to try to balance the fill for future phases, they are looking to clear a larger area, move dirt around that they can then use to balance in other areas of the site. That's something we invested a lot of thought in, but we weren't able to come up with a solution. We'll obviously continue to monitor what we might be able to do, but given the topographical constraints, it would probably be very temporary.
Okay, well, I appreciate you sharing your considerations, went through that.
Well, trees are important in Cary, and I think we all recognize that.
We all know that, so, but I respect the assessment you did come up with, and so I'm not second-guessing that at all. So thanks for at least giving me a little of the background there on that.
Sure.
If I could, there was one of the diagrams you had shows sort of like the 33 buildings. There's a little more better view on one of your slides. It also corresponds to something in our work notes here, but there was one that, it was, I guess this one off to the, showing right now on the screen, off to the left side, maybe a little bigger view of that, or that nice picture that was on your home page, or your first page. That would work too. That works perfect. That works
Okay.
perfect. So let me just ask a couple of questions about this. And again, I'm just flabbergasted about all the buildings and all the stuff going on in here. It's really neat. This phasing that we've talked about, we've seen the numbers and percentages in the table, and that's great. And that's all rather arithmetically conceptual. Is there any way you can take and look at this chart and point to kind of here's where phase one is and here's where phase two might be? Because I'm drawing a conclusion that phase one feels like the stuff where the so-called grocery store might be facing Carytown comes first, and the exciting so-called North Hills thing, or the Avalon thing out in
Avalon.
Alpharetta,
Yes.
is kind of in the back, and that's kind of later. Am I drawing a wrong impression, or is that kind of the way the phasing might work here as well?
See if I can.
So I love the numbers, but I need the picture.
So here's a hypothetical, to see if this helps out.
All right?
This is a hypothetical scenario that would have 78,900 square feet of non-retail, using the terminology we established earlier, and 204,000 square feet of retail. And you can see 2 is the big box, presumed to be the Wegmans. Mm-hmm. You're picking up the non-retail uses and the vertically integrated component along the village lane, the buildings to the right, 6 and 8.
Which those are 1 to 2 story buildings, and along the Carytown are also in the spec here as 1 to 2 story buildings too. So.
Right, and this assumes that they get built at the minimum. It assumes that all these buildings get built at the minimum scenario on the preliminary development plan.
Well, the minimum is 1 and the maximum is 2.
That's right, it assumes they get built as a 1-story.
So, but they could be a 2.
Mm-hmm.
But net, this is sort of mostly, like building number 2 feels kind of like a 1, given your
Yeah,
potential.
building number
decline.
2 is a 1 here, 3 and 4 are 1s.
1s to 2s, maybe? The other
Well, they're
things-
listed as 1 or 2, but just for this hypothetical scenario, we did the math as if it were a 1.
1, okay. And then the stuff as you get further in maybe starts to have a little more elevation.
Correct. So you begin to see the beginnings of the village lane, the bottom of the L shape, the southernmost portion of the village lane begins to click in place here. Wegmans, as we understand, the arrangement that the developer has is that this whole pod would need to be built together. Wegmans doesn't want to open and then continue to have construction adjacent to them, for the next year. And the deck, of course, needs to exist as they open as well. So this is a likely natural scenario for the first phase, but they're not limited to this. If some office user came in and wanted to build an office building first, the conditions do allow that scenario to occur.
But we wouldn't preclude you've used the word Wegmans, from still landing here and doing what we want to do here, even if we had some sort of office across the street. Or else-
Correct.
Yeah, so this is how it's going to look. And from the pictures and the diagrams, D1, the parking, it seems to be
Yes.
consistently shown as surface parking. It's not a structure.
D1 is a tabletop deck as proposed.
The pictures don't show it that way, but it's a tabletop. So when folks come in off Cary Town Park Boulevard and drive in on Trinity Lane here, at least during the initial phase, so forth, what they're going to see is potentially to the right is some office buildings, hotel. I'm sure they'll be beautiful and high, whatever, whenever they come
Or the
back.
future site thereof initially,
I saw the video fly through. I remember it fondly. But when they look to the left,
right?
they're going to see something that looks like, and I don't mean to use this in any way negative, but it seems like an example. You know, there's a new development with a Costco and a lot of single-story buildings that was recently put in an apex along Highway 64. And, you know, a lot of trees went down, that aside, but it was that kind of feel. This feels to me like that to start. And I don't want to draw that kind of negative impression, but it's what it feels like based on the way these buildings are described. And that's forevermore going to be kind of the entrance to this whole thing until you get to kind of the good stuff or the North Hill stuff or the Avalon stuff in the back. And I'm just,
So there
I'm
are-
struggling with that. That's not the dream fulfilled for at least the first period, and maybe forever you're going to be driving by that.
Right. So aesthetics are important to staff as well. This is something that we've discussed. There are conditions that relate to the screening of the tabletop deck. The intention is basically worded that you will not be able to see parking as you come in. Remember the topography that we talked about? It rises up through this site. So as you come in on Trinity, you're low, and then the natural grade is moving up. And that's how the tabletop deck will fit in. Not saying that you won't see the top of the Wegmans, but there are requirements, and there's talk in the plan about it being an art walk. And so they're between the elevations of the deck, how it's designed to screen its appearance, and the use of berming, and then landscaping. There are many things that are mentioned in the plan as conditions to screen that view so that as you drive in, you know, your sense isn't, I'm looking at a parking lot. It's something much more attractive.
Well, I appreciate that, but so much of the model for these type of developments, again, the Avalon, I think the developer in the neighborhood meeting mentioned Santana Row in California is another example, and there's several others. They have this characteristic look and feel of the main little central street, okay, with multi-story, retail on the first floor, restaurants, what have you like that. It's beautiful walking trees and the stick figures you see in the concepts, but it's really nice, and it's very consistent with what you see here in the back. And parking is always put around the periphery of that, and it may be initially single surface parking, and over time perhaps it becomes level structures, or maybe some other building, high-rise might go in those areas as well, but they don't put the parking out front. And so as I look at this, it just feels so almost inside out to me, you know, given what's going to be coming later on with the parking around the periphery as these typically be, that the parking is not in front, that the parking maybe should be in back. And, you know, that beautiful retail that's in building 2 or whatever it may be, because forevermore, it just feels, I'm struggling with it, and, you know, I don't want the Costco-like effect down there in Apex with the big parking lot and the buildings behind it, and I know that's not the intent, but I'm just, this one's giving me some heartburn.
Well, the aesthetic concerns that you addressed were ones that the staff identified early, and we worked to encourage the applicant to develop conditions, which we believe they did, that address the appearance. And in terms of mobility, pedestrian corridors, as you move down the main street and reach the intersection here, this provides the ability to flow through this corridor and keeps whatever's in the big box somewhat in line with Village Lane, the main part of it, the main part of the L. And we felt that, given that pedestrian relationship and the screening conditions with the deck, we were comfortable with the design. We felt that it would achieve what we look for here in Cary.
I'm not going to second guess that. I'm still struggling with it. I'm still struggling. So let me just jump to my final area, and I'm not going to get into the details here because I do understand that we may, depending upon how my colleagues feel about it, may consider having some more discussion about this at a follow-up meeting or something, if not resolved tonight. But the traffic study, okay? And, you know, what's inside is great, but getting to it is 90% of the discussion here. You did comment in the staff presentation that the initial traffic study, which was done, it's in our packet here, didn't comprehend the additional square footage.
Correct.
And if this were to go with rezoning, it would be okay in understanding that there's going to be more square footage here, and the traffic mitigation, the study and the mitigation are based on an older number for square footage. You provided some pros and cons about take that for what it is, it's okay, and there's some concerns if you take it because it could be some problems down the road. If I zoom out, and I very much appreciated that the traffic study here did comprehend the developments going on across the street with IKEA's in your baseline. So, that stuff is in the mix here, but still there are some important intersections that are not being covered here for your below the traffic that you think the plan should really be now. And there also seem to be some interesting overlaps with, well, I think IKEA is covering that intersection, but the applicant here has made an offer to do the same sort of thing. And we don't have time here for me to be comfortable with this very important area, I think, this evening, to understand how all those different traffic plans by different developers here and maybe the town of Cary are going to fit together. But we've got several of the puzzle pieces more on the table than we had when we looked at IKEA, but I don't think we have that comprehensive plan that I know that town of Cary staff has got in their heads, because approving this thing all really depends on, that's not a concept, and not waiting for 3 more puzzle pieces for other developers to come in and say, yeah, I'll do that one, I'll do this one. It would give a lot more comfort to really understand the details there. I'm not saying that they're not there, I don't understand them. So it's something that still is a unknown for me to really embrace this at this point. Not saying I wouldn't, but I'm not there yet without the information.
The short general,
The only thing I was going to add is we do have staff prepared to speak to any of those issues that you like tonight.
Well, I don't want to monopolize the meeting because I want to turn it over to my colleagues, so they may have other questions.
You want to sit on that one for now, then?
That's it for me right now.
All right.
I just want to pick up on the question that I think Victor brought up, and maybe someone else as well, about affordable housing. I know that just the concept of this is gorgeous as an entry to Cary, and I think obviously a lot of work has been put into developing it as something attractive and drawing people into the area. So it's totally understandable that affordable housing might not factor into a development of this nature. But I'm looking at the map initially and realizing that just adjacent to it is a substantial amount of what appears to be Cary's affordable housing component, and wondering what the impact is going to be on them. That Kennard Drive, I guess, comes through one of the 2 apartment complexes, or provides access to them at the current time. And then extending that, of course, would bring more traffic into this particular facility. And then there's a mobile home park just north of that as well, it looks like, which I think a lot of people wonder why there's still a mobile home park in Cary, but surely this is one of the few places where people can live with who can afford a level of, who have an income level that would support that sort of lifestyle. And I'm wondering how that's going to eventually be addressed as a part of this, or what the impact, I guess, is more the question. As all of this construction starts happening and traffic is brought into the area. I don't know that you've heard anything from the meetings, but maybe they're a less vocal population.
we have heard that the developer, and then this comes from some of the public meetings where the neighbors have attended, it's our understanding that the developer has been working proactively with the adjacent neighbors to the west and looking to provide some additional landscaping. I don't know all the details. That's been something that they've been working out, but we did receive some positive feedback from the neighbors as it relates to that. So we've been glad to hear that they're proactively engaged and working together. I don't know the details. If you'd like to know more, we could see if the applicant could provide more information on that.
Okay, well, that was just something that I immediately noticed just by looking at the map, and was curious about whether or not that had been addressed by them in this process. And my other concerns, few though they are about the input, the egress, and the ability to move traffic in an area that's clearly going to be very congested once all of the proposed planning is built out. So making sure that we get that right, I think, is a key part of making sure that everybody's comfortable with the eventual approval of this. So those are still maybe some things that we can hear a little bit more about.
Sure.
Is there like a specific question to that, or, I mean, you want them to expound on it now, or?
No, I mean, I'd rather get the overview first, and then if we get into the weeds on traffic, then maybe that'll be something where we look at the details and have someone explain exactly how that's going to meet the need that is going to be coming.
Okay. Is that it for now?
Yes.
Yes, I had some questions. I wanted the staff to help me out concerning off-site improvements for Trinity Road and Quinter Drive. Who's going to be responsible for those? How you envision those happening? And, you know, if the applicant is responsible for any of those or not. I'm talking about off-site, not on-site.
Right. Sounds, that is a question I think our transportation facility staff would be best equipped to answer. So perhaps now is perhaps as good a time as any to try to respond to some of those transportation-related questions. Here's Jerry Jensen.
Good evening. Some of the members probably don't know me. I'm Jerry Jensen. I'm the Director of Transportation Facilities, so I'll try to answer some of your questions. So in particular, let's maybe talk about the off-sites of Quinard and Trinity Road Extension. So the answer to that is yet to be determined about responsibilities, who's going to build what. I do know part of the development agreement is those two items will be addressed during that phase of negotiation with that. The level of participation by the town is dependent upon how the development agreement is structured and written. So we do know with certainty that those two roads have a very big impact on the entire Eastern Cary Gateway Center, the whole area in general, and this development. So some commitment by the applicant as well as the town certainly are something that we'll have to be looking at. As we had mentioned earlier about the Trinity Road extension, we don't know exactly how we want to configure that off-site, whether we want to make it in a temporary location or do we want to make it more of in a permanent location. All that is going to be studied by the town with all the stakeholders along the length of that roadway so we can better define what our needs are. There are still a lot of Eastern Cary Gateway to be built north of this site as far as office towers and things of that nature, so we want to make sure that the road and the land use on that northern part can coexist and be a viable option in the future. So Trinity Road is like I say, it's going to be a little bit more study on that, on what it needs to be. Does it need to be configured as a two-lane initially, or maybe a larger investment needs to be made to maybe its ultimate configuration. So those things, even though they haven't been quite figured out today, we do know are going to have to be an integral part of how we move forward in the development agreement, as well as some of the other initiatives that Rob talked about. As far as, I think there was a question about maybe some of the traffic impacts off-site. The good news is that the level of commitment that the Fenton project actually has towards mitigating traffic congestion is quite extensive. There are other traffic mitigations that are being proposed not only by IKEA. There was a handful of mitigations there that IKEA was making, but there is also a second phase of the Cary Town Center revitalization project that also has some similar improvements that weren't offered by the Fenton or IKEA. So those are being worked out as we talk, as we go forward through that process and approval process for that rezoning. So, and again, those initiatives that aren't necessarily handled by land development projects is something that the town and NCDOT are going to have to look to see what opportunities exist for us to make improvement. But the balance of road improvements with pedestrian and bike improvements, as well as some fairly extensive transit initiatives that are going along this area, certainly should make mobility a top priority for the Eastern Cary Gateway and the vision to get what we want out here. So I feel very confident that the level of participation by all the development activities occurring out here is going to help balance out the the needs and desires for mobility in that area. So I don't know if that necessarily answered all your questions and gotten too far down the weeds, but again, there are, we feel confident the number of improvements that they're making right now, as addressed as zoning conditions, are very, very workable. Those that still need additional work are going to have to be hammered out either in the development agreement or looked at as a major initiative on the part of the town or NCDOT. So.
Just a brief follow-up. Is the town the primary property owner on the Trinity Road extension?
No, that's all owned by the state,
Okay.
majority of it.
So maybe.
So we have a lot of
maybe
stakeholders
NCDOT
other than
would
the
be
town.
interested.
Yeah, so the stakeholders are obviously the state. Yeah.
The only other comment I would make is I was on town council when this was last rezoned. This is a much, much better plan.
While Mr. Jensen's up here, does anyone else have traffic-specific questions that we could address?
Not traffic, no.
Great, thank you very much. The only question I have is more of a process question. The other questions I had have already been answered. This kind of novel approach, the development agreement, this very large multi-conditioned project. My simple process question is, I mean, we've got a lot of things that the way we normally think of them, zoning conditions and like, they're locked down pretty tight. Once this rezoning gets approved by town council, if it does get approved by town council, those conditions run with the land, as we say. The guidebook and all this stuff becomes locked in pretty heavy. What happens if there's a modification? We were just talking about the champion trees being maybe a little fluid in the initial stages. What happens if we have to revisit some things? Do we got to rezone this?
As with any rezoning case, the zoning conditions, the wording that you see on the preliminary development plan is a commitment. So none of that can change except through rezoning the property. So that's why there's been so much work to look at the vision and the concept that's been brought forward and to try to find the balance where there's enough flexibility for a large site like this to be able to develop the project from the developer standpoint while guaranteeing everything that we need to guarantee through those zoning conditions. As part of the preliminary development plan, there are a number of modifications to standards that are laid out. So where they have anticipated the relief that may be needed, including the champion trees. So that flexibility to be able to modify those types of standards in the ordinance, as with any rezoning case, has been captured. To the extent that modifications have not been captured through that process, then yes, there would need, the property would need to be rezoned to the extent that the flexibility isn't provided in the zoning conditions. But we believe, and I believe the applicant believes, that has been captured because those are the voluntary conditions that they have offered.
Well, anyone else have any questions at all? And that includes of our applicant too.
Sorry, the worst thing about going first is you think about things that everybody else is talking about afterwards.
No problem at all.
I assumed that there would be some discussion or some thought process around affordable housing in this area and age-restricted because it makes the most sense around our destination centers. And this is more of a comment than a question. I'm disappointed that I haven't heard any plans about either age-restricted or affordable housing because it, like I said, it makes the most sense to have it around a destination center because there's going to be a retail, the IKEA is going to be over there. You've got people that are going to be living in that area that would maybe need that type of housing. So I think it would be more appropriate around a destination center.
And again, when you look at the destination center, this is The entire destination center is about 800 acres. This is a 92-acre site, so there's a lot of other area within the destination center. This is, because of when you look at the location of this with the road network and the location, it's sort of a centralized portion. And there are, other areas throughout the gateway that as new development comes up will be looked at as a whole. We don't expect any one portion to fulfill all of the needs within the entire area.
I didn't expect it to, but I think that it'd be nice to have it not kind of pass the buck to the next applicant. I think that it's important that we look at that around all the different areas and not have affordable or age-restricted housing in one specific section of it, but have it sprinkled throughout.
Just wanted to add a little bit to that. Let me pull up a different slide. So, and we do hear your interest and the interest of several of the board members in this topic. Looking here at the Eastern Cary Gateway area, so area number 7, immediately to the west of the mixed-use center, is identified for multifamily housing and civic uses, and then the yellow area to the north is identified for transit and multifamily-oriented uses. So we do have at least 2 other areas where clearly residential and those other policies and things can play out. The plan does not speak to affordable housing here in the center area of the site. So just passing that along as information in terms of looking at the bigger area as a whole and what was talked about when the plan was being reviewed and adopted. But we do still hear your interest in that topic. So.
Are there more questions on this side?
I got a couple of just follow-up questions. One is I look at some of the tables and charts, I just want to make sure I understand that the hotel square footage, or otherwise hospitality, is that rolled up into the commercial when we look at those percentages and those matrices? So the hotel is considered in the commercial.
The hospitality is identified in the use table as its own use.
Okay.
So it's kind of an interesting one. You could look at a hotel as a business, but it's also where people stay. And residents, people that are spending the night, are sort of captive customers for a mixed-use development like this. So in a mixed-use setting, it performs multiple functions. So we left it as its own use. But a hotel would not qualify as a vertically integrated use unless it was indeed integrated with other uses other than hotel.
Okay. So as I look at the table where we have break it down by basically office, residential, and retail, would there be a fourth one for other, for hospitality, or is it rolled? That's, I guess, does it fall into office, residential, retail when we look at those? I'm just for clarification.
Let me pull my plan up here.
Sure.
So if you look in the very top right corner of the preliminary development plan, there's a little table that has a couple of yellow columns. And you'll see that the proposed uses in that table are office, and then residential, and then commercial, and then the last one is hotel. And it's indicated as its own use in terms of square footage and rooms, and it's not included in the mix because for the reasons that I articulated. That's kind of a hybrid between retail and kind of residential in terms of function.
So the hotels could come almost any time within the development. I mean, it's not part of that percentage mix that we've been talking about earlier.
So hospitality was included as a non-retail use.
Okay, as a non-retail use.
However, remember the earlier phases have to be vertically integrated. So if you build a hotel and it's the same use on all the floors, that's not vertically integrated, that does not count towards your non-retail vertically integrated space.
Good point. All right.
But if they figure out how to vertically integrate it, for example, there's retail on the ground floor and the hotel is on the upper floors, then in that case, it could potentially qualify.
Okay. Another question is, looking at the work section, and I'm just curious, has been any generation of, in terms of job creation, and any breakdown of what those jobs look like in terms of projected salary, economic impact, things like that in this project?
That would be a question that the staff doesn't have any information regarding. We could see if the applicant would be available if you'd like to ask them that question.
Sure. Is there, I'm curious about the job impact and the.
Now, if I can just ask, does this address the use, or is this part of the community plan?
So we can have the applicant address that if you'd like. The thing I was going to add is, depending on the type of town participation, if we're going to enter into an economic development incentive. So this is different than an development agreement. That would then address our participation would likely be tied to those types of numbers.
And it wasn't about economic, so to the point, the question I want to get to is, as we talk about live, work, and play, and we have 600 to 920 units of housing, and if the intent is that there'll be people who work there and live there, what the target market is. And so understanding the number of jobs and whether we're talking about $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 a year, or for most service workers, it's going to be 25 to 30%, $25,000 to $30,000 a year, $10 to $15 an hour. And so I'm just curious as to what that breakout, if there was one.
See if they want to address it.
Sure. And if they don't have the data, that's fine. I mean, it's a question.
Hey there.
Hi.
So I believe your question was what's the type of quality of jobs that we're envisioning, what the numbers are and the growth. We've provided that information. Was that your question?
Yes.
Okay. We've provided that information to staff, and I didn't bring a copy of it with me here. But the concept and the idea is that as you invest in the retail and create that sense of place, you create the place where office tenants, sophisticated office tenants want to be. People like MetLife, people like want a really integrated campus. And the fear, and I know some of you had some questions with the phasing of, does the retail come first, and is it this really exciting place? If you don't start with that, then you see the quality of jobs that tend to be lower because they're less floors, they're not that type of serious office tenant. And so we can provide the data on the information for the economic impact, but with the build out of 1.2 million square feet of office, the desire is to build that retail rich sense of place, to get the hype going and to have a large corporate tenant that can take up not 2 floors, not 4 floors, but 6 floors and create that high quality job.
And so I appreciate that, having been involved in past lives with some development like this, so I haven't seen creating that hype. So it's really looked to be the organic processes that you create the retail and they will come, which is the high quality jobs, which in the high quality employment, using that term, is then what's going to also drive the housing development in there, because it's really targeted those folks who are the MetLife, so whomever the world are targeting, that's really what the live part is.
That's right, and I mean, it's cliche to use, but if you look at North Hills, it didn't start as a 20-story office tower. It started as an older development, and that was not the greenfields that we have, it was more of an infill. But it started with that kind of lower level residential. People started hearing more about it, and it was able to get to the heights and the scale and attract the tenants that it has now that it wouldn't have been able to do from day one. Now, that took years to build out, and it happened in a different way when not that many types of developments have occurred. Now, since that time, we've seen numerous examples, like the Santana Row that was raised earlier, and the Avalon project, certainly, that once you start with that exciting first phase, even if it's retail heavy at first, it drives the impetus for employers who are looking at that type of metric. How many shoppers am I going to be, getting there? How can I attract a high-end multifamily developer to come there and locate, to drive the jobs, and to get somebody that's really exciting to take up that much office space, because it's a great deal of office space and it's very difficult to do that from the get-go. So I think the concept is, and we can provide those details later, is that the more you're able to invest in that upfront, the higher quality of jobs and the better tenant you're going to get on the backside.
Okay,
They did provide it as a market study. I mean, it's a fascinating study, but for the purpose of a rezoning consideration, we didn't bring it. It's not an integral discussion point to that. That's why I bring up the economic development potential incentive that we may have if we are hopefully lucky enough to get a corporate headquarters out here. That would be wonderful, and that's something that council would then consider as part of that package.
Oh, and sorry, just to follow up, we do have a little bit of data based on that market study. In the 2.9 million square feet over a 7-year build-out, we estimate it to be $795 million in total investment and over 6,290 jobs.
Thanks. I don't want to take up any time because it is a zoning hearing, and that would be interesting to seeing a little bit more breakdown on those 6,200 jobs approximately. But
It's a good problem to have.
it is a good problem to have. One other question for staff. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. You mentioned earlier, on the very last slide, you walked us through, you showed the PDP and then the development agreement, and then there's other major initiatives that are underway through the Imagine Cary plan. And you mentioned one of them was the Trinity Road, kind of, that extension is part of that, and a number of, some other, I think you mentioned infrastructure. I'm curious what other initiatives may be going on that are connected to this, or
The biggest one we didn't dive into is really the transit initiative with Wake County and the other regional partners. And what will come of that with BRT, commuter rail, that will undoubtedly be somewhere along this region, and will certainly be I guess a good place of stops, transit stops, to feed this development, as well as the mall development and other parts of the town. So that's not something that has to be addressed with regards to the zoning, but we want to make sure that there's flexibility in what's being provided here, such that if a bus route, for example, runs through this, that there's flexibility to provide that in the form of a transit stop.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I guess the one thing I was hoping to hear is that, as we talked a lot about housing, as I do a quick analysis of that 6,200, I don't have the density per square foot that's usually available on office versus commercial, but I understand that the housing is really focused on the folks who are going to be in the offices, as was referred to as the high quality. More than half of the third of the space or better is going to be in commercial, and that's typically going to be kind of different. That's not going to be high quality as defined as $80,000 or more a year. So I guess it's the point of looking at housing opportunities for folks who are maybe, using as the standard definition of 30% of their income going towards their housing costs, and echoing what some of the other folks have said, that if not at this facility, at this development, I feel as though there's a lost opportunity, but hopefully we'll see those opportunities sooner than later. I'm done.
Okay. Anything additional? I'm good. How about on this side? Anything pop in your head since we've been
No
doing
questions, no.
No, I had
Round
one,
two.
and I hate to ask the applicant to come back down again. I'm sorry. And it concerns the design guide, which is a very important part of this overall plan. And I interpret the design guide as being largely developed and authored by you folks with your experience in other sites and so forth. Is that right?
Well, it's true that we came up with a lot of the examples of the pictures of the quality and the types of fixtures, but the skeleton of it, what was going in it, what the chapters would be, was more collaborative with the staff and the staff's consultant of what they'd like to see, and pushing us past the point of just several commitments and several points, but really fleshing out the entire character and skin of what we would be seeing.
Well, the pictures are beautiful. That's great. But I ask in the context, historically, the town of Cary has had a very strong point of view about certain, retailers and restaurant chains and such like that, who often come to the town of Cary and they want to have a certain look and feel, because that's the template we used all over the United States, and that's what we want to have the look and feel to be. And we usually don't accommodate that, because when you're in Cary, we have a different way of looking at that. So in looking at the design guide, it's not clear to me. The pictures are beautiful, but if, let's say, a fast food casual, or some certain retailer has a look and feel they want, which they use everywhere where they go, and they were to come in and say, I want to do that, does the design guide preclude them from doing that because the look and feel of the pictures that we've got here, they would be inconsistent with that? Or is the design guide such that if a particular retailer or restaurant chain wanted to come in here and they had their own look and feel, the design guide would accommodate that? So I don't know if the design guide accommodates or precludes those situations with retailers or restaurant chains that do have very strongly look and feels they want to maintain, which, the kind of style you have here doesn't show that kind of a place, but I can imagine this would be of high interest to those people with their well-developed look and feel. Does it accommodate or preclude it?
I think the answer is it depends, but it will generally preclude it, because I think what it'll do is say that if it's substantially similar to this, it can be approved. But if it's not substantially similar to what you see in the design guidelines, then it's determined to be inconsistent, and we'd have to go, or they would have to go for a modification to the Cary Appearance Manual. But generally speaking, what we found in these types of developments is once you create a palette and a template like this, even those retailers that might have their standard, this is just the way we do it, once they see kind of the dynamics, will be able to modify themselves to fit within what they see or what's substantially similar to what they see.
Did you have something to add?
I just wanted to add, the town's current architectural standards do not preclude prototypical architecture. What we do find is the implementation of the 9 elements included therein often require developers to deviate somewhat, sometimes significantly, sometimes not quite as much. But whether it's rhythm, proportionality, color, transparency, 9 different elements, as they look to comply with all of them, they'll often end up with at least a one-off. But we don't preclude the prototypical look. In this development, the ground floor retail will have a lot of flexibility. We will look to the guidebook as far as materials, it's a caliber of design, but there still will be, I would expect, tenants that will achieve some of their prototypical appearance on the main street as part of their facade. But keep in mind, the retail facade on the ground floor is different from the permanent building above. Tenants come, tenants go, they'll change out their facades, but the office or the residential above them is going to remain in place. So you've kind of got 2 different things occurring. So I hope that helps somewhat, but it gives you maybe a little bit of insight into how we get what we get in Cary. But we don't preclude prototypical architecture. It just usually ends up modifying itself to meet our requirements, whether those be our normal standards or, in this case, the design guidebook.
Got it, okay. And just while the applicant's still there, maybe I read someplace something, but if I'm mistaken, tell me, but was Columbia Development involved in that shopping center development there in Apex along 64, where the Costco is at? Is that?
Yes, it was, but this is clearly vastly different from that.
Okay. I'm just curious. I didn't mean to make
Sure.
any negative comments about that before on your part. But
I'm not offended, don't worry.
Before we get away, Victor, do you have, you had some other lingering or hanging out there
Yeah,
traffic stuff. You want to address those now, or?
I think there's more there, and I'd almost rather just see some more data than I think is appropriate here if we have the luxury of one meeting. And I hate to say this, and this is almost deja vu. Last year, we went through the Cary Town Plan, the December meeting, and it was the move section that was kind of rocky, and I know, and I felt bad about it since, but I was the only dissenting vote on approving the Town of Cary plan because of the move section. And I feel a little deja vu here on the move section equivalent here, and I do not want to be a dissenting vote, but I want to get there because I want to better understand the traffic thing. And I think if we do have the accommodation in the schedule to be able to do that, I think that would be a wonderful topic. If we don't,
my suggestion would be don't bank on that. So if you have traffic questions, we'll go around, but if you have them in your mind, we may want to address them today because there's just a chance we may get this.
I understand.
Get this dispensed with this evening, and I don't want you to have held your questions and then not get to. So
okay.
Work on those and we'll go through.
So I've just had a question more about the developer agreement, just to understand a little bit better and understand what that means in terms of the control and the oversight that the town has as this thing moves forward. What does that look like?
Sure. Well, I guess it's kind of more of a new tool for us to use, but many communities throughout the nation in North Carolina do use these. What we're looking at, we had a council meeting work session on December the 5th to kind of talk about that a little bit, and we brought in an expert from the UNC School of Government, David Owens, to talk to us about that. And so what he said, and probably best to read it, that since 2005, development agreements have been authorized to provide cities and developers with authority to agree about aspects of development that otherwise might be considered illegal contract zoning. Cities remain limited by their existing authority and cannot use this authority to impose any tax or fee for which a city does not otherwise have the authority. He went on to say, and these are the things that a development agreement could address. A development agreement provides opportunity to coordinate the integration of and payment for public capital facilities, agree upon aspects of phasing, agree that development standards will remain stable through a period of agreement, that's vested rights, and agree to non-traditional development concepts and standards. So where that might apply for us, and so at the December 5th council work session, well, let me back up first. You heard tonight that the developer has offered a condition that they will have a development agreement. So what that means is that by approving, if you do the zoning, that is a condition that it has to have that. So what we would be working for is to have that, is to find ways whereby I can kind of detail a little bit of what they've said they're interested in. Certainly that's participation by the town in form of cash or capital improvements, parking decks, those types of things. But really what that gets them is vested rights. They don't want to be back before the council. If you know, after some period of time of zoning and they don't build soon enough, they'd be back before council to get approval in at least a quasi-judicial setting where they'd be addressing many of these things over again. If rules, regulations have changed in that period of time, they'd be then subject to those new rules and regulations. So this part of benefit to them would be is you kind of lock that in. You kind of know what they get, they can expect that, and there's some flexibility in that. For us to participate, let's say we were to build some infrastructure for them. You talked a lot about tonight about Quinard or Trinity. Obviously, Quinard has an off-site improvement that would connect over to Maynard, and I think that's something that we're continuing to evaluate what our level of participation would be. But in order for us to participate, what would happen would be is that we would want assurances that you would get things sooner. That was some of the board's questions tonight about what's from phase 1 to phase 5 or otherwise. Well, I can guarantee that our participation is going to be tied to doing more things sooner. Obviously, our council has indicated very much so that they'd like to see more office built throughout Cary, but this is a specific great location for office, and for us to participate and have those assurances that they could bring that to us sooner is certainly at least in concept, seems to make sense that we may want to participate in that. And while I have this map up, let's see, certainly brought up Trinity Road, but the completion of Trinity Road then starts to open up other areas in our gateway plan, and this area 2 is certainly an important area flanked by I-40, but for office. So if you start doing things, town participating, we'd want to see that. We kind of said, part of the bigger picture is how Fenton might be able to jumpstart activity in the rest of the gateway. So we've put together a team, consists of myself, our town attorney, and other staff to help start developing this, and it would ultimately come back before council in the form of a public hearing before they would vote into an agreement. So again, I think of the development agreement, I think of you get zoning conditions, and the development agreement is kind of an added layer on top of that. I hope that answers some of your questions.
It does. I was just trying to get a better understanding of how much oversight that continues to give you, if there would be any deviations, or if these are just really confirming that the agreement will hold as they go forward, since this is a multi-year project.
And the only thing I'll add, since you asked about looking at it in the future, part of the statute requires yearly reports from the developer back to the town about how things are going, annual compliance report. So that's a mechanism and a tool that we'd have with the developer agreement. We'll guarantee that annual check-in on how things are going out there.
Good to know. Thank you.
I have nothing further.
Nothing new? Traffic you want to revisit?
Well, I'll just, the report is very comprehensive here, but I'll just go to the page here which talks about the traffic analysis versus the proposed versus the maximum development. And by your own chart here, you are showing that what's not factored in here is potentially as much as 37% more traffic, for example, during the AM peak time, perhaps 20% more during the PM peak time, 12% overall. Seems like a big number. And we've got a whole lot of intersections around here which are getting to E and F, grade levels or service levels, quality of service levels, and that just seems like a big, particularly in the morning, 37%. Well, that's a whole heck of a lot more cars based on your analysis that, or traffic rather, that, we've decided we're not going to put that in at the time. And I know your rationale is advantages and disadvantages, but
Yeah,
you
so
know,
that's,
I'd hate to be in that traffic jam that morning, particularly given we're not doing the mitigation on Maynard, Maynard Avenue here by any of the stuff proposed here.
so that's to clarify that, that they build more than what was modeled in the traffic study. The concern is how do we account for those improvements? So
Yeah, basically.
the very short answer is in the development agreement. We, again, if we're going to realize the intensities to that very maximum ceiling that we've talked about, then, part of that development agreement has to be structured such that we need to look at participation of what those, in the future, what would those improvements be, and how would we have a check-in point between both the developer and the town of Cary as how those additional improvements could get built. And those additional improvements could get built in the future. If they are identified as a need, then the development agreement would be structured such that, both the town and the developer would participate in some level of making those improvements. We don't know what the future will be if they build out to that ultimate level, or whether they'll get to that ultimate level. We aspire for them to be at that level. But we also have a lot of other investment going on, as Russ said earlier, particularly in the transit initiatives. Those are some very major transit efforts that could have a wide-ranging impact on whether people get out of their cars and use transit to get to and from this development.
And those aren't factored in here to be
And,
conservative.
yeah, again, and it's not, so it's kind of a car-centric type of study that was done initially. But the good news is that, through the development agreement, we're going to have to come to some realization if they get to those upper limits. They haven't been studied, so how do we collaborate together to identify those needs whenever they get to that level, and then what level of participation can be made by both parties. So it's a little bit unknown right now. It'd be almost be a little bit premature to study those things right now because, again, that could be many years in the making. And again, with the transit initiatives that are coming on fairly quickly, with expanded bus service and frequency in Cary and the region, as well as BRT, those could be some significant game changers and could actually keep the level of congestion down. So does that help you out a little bit?
I can appreciate the uncertainty, but let me just play back what you said. So you're anticipating in this development agreement some mechanism by which if the development starts to head toward its maximum level beyond what the current traffic analysis considered or assumed, and again, being conservative, there's a lot of folks that want to drive their cars and not take the bus or whatever future transportation may be. There's a mechanism by which the development agreement can then go back and renegotiate traffic mitigation and improvements and so forth the developer would have to then attend to. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying it's a renegotiation because they're already committing to a base level of improvement out there that would get them to a certain ceiling of intensity.
12 of the 15 things that you specified.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
They're already agreeing to do 12.
They've already agreed that those are part of the zoning. There's no renegotiating those. Those follow with the zoning case, okay? We're just talking about in the future, if they get to a level, a maximum level that's in their development plan, that part of that development agreement would be there would be a check-in point and a reevaluation of what other additional needs may be present at the time they want to get to that maximum level.
So you would have a constraint someplace in achieving the full maximum.
Yeah.
Because the initial roadway improvements that are proposed here may be perfectly sufficient, but if good success occurs, we get to the maximum level, you'll be able to have some way to say, you can't go to the maximum, the mitigations you did back in day one here are now going to be insufficient. You may have to go back to some streets that got widened one way and go find some more right away, or whatever else they may be.
Yeah.
You'll be able to.
We get to that point, yeah. We just need to pause and say, particularly in development, the development agreement is the right vehicle to say, you can get to this level, but to get to that upper level, we need to probably have another way of evaluating what additional needs are out there.
Okay. So you're
Okay, does that make sense?
Okay, so you are anticipating that kind of a mechanism in the development?
Yeah, I think that those are part of the discussions with the developer agreement that we'll be having. There's a wide range of things. And again, it would be a little bit premature to try to study the maximum right now and have improvements and investments made that may not really be needed in the future. So that could be dollars spent on other things within their development.
And I appreciate and respect that. Just 30% potentially more peak traffic in the morning alarmed me.
Right.
That we may not have accommodated. So back to the many traffic improvements being proposed here are certainly great and go a long way towards making things move more smoothly in and out of the property. But there's the two intersections that were not offered in this. And they are the intersections at Maynard at both Walnut and Carytown Boulevard. And those, I think, get caught up with some concerns about right-of-way being sufficient or having to secure right-of-way. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't need it. But those things were actually identified as issues with the so-called IKEA redevelopment proposal. And also, I think there's floating around, there's a private proposal for the second phase of Carytown Center that's going to come up. And, you know, these things are these intersections don't seem to be something developers are keen to work towards, given those right-of-way issues. If I get, these are the ones that no one wants to touch.
Right.
Is that fair? So how do they get fixed?
Well, I think that's again, in the context, how do they get fixed is in the sense of a development agreement. If there are barriers to getting them fixed because it's out of their control, kind of like the Quinard Road extension issues, they may not be able to go out and acquire additional right-of-way for that project. You know, these intersections may be, if they find that there are barriers like right-of-way, that the town may need to help participate in that acquisition of those things, then that's the appropriate level for that would be in a development agreement.
So you're confident that through the development agreement discussion, again, those will get addressed by some party, town of Cary, developer, 1, 2, or 3, given the intensity of development in this particular area.
Well,
you're confident those will get addressed?
Well, I think it's the confidence goes in that that will, you know, these are part of some additional discussions that need to be taking place with the Fenton development in general. Okay, and seeing what their opportunities are to do those improvements, and that could be placed in the development agreement. And again, it could be that the only way they could do those improvements is if the town participated in a project or DOT, state DOT participated in the project. So, you know, we need a further dialogue about what are the true barriers for them from doing that and their ability to make those improvements. So I think that'll get flushed out during the development agreement. If during that discussions with Fenton that they don't prove to be able to go there, then, you know, again, we have other developments like the Carytown redevelopment or phase 2 of their project that, you know, those improvements are also on their traffic studies as well. So there's, you know, discussions with that group as far as what they can and can't do and the barriers they may be having to doing that improvement. I think the IKEA didn't have I think those intersections were identified at IKEA, but I think there was also some issues with being able to have control of the right-of-way, particularly on Maynard Road. That was a big issue for them to be doing some of those improvements. So again, I think as we look through any of these developments that are triggering these traffic improvements, I think looking at the barriers from being able to do those improvements are something that the town is going to have to look at and see how we participate that, because quite honestly, if nobody does those improvements, they're going to show up.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to need to be accountable for those. So that's what we'll be looking at.
And I do know you have an overall plan on the transportation team for this area. What you're saying there is, I understand the need, not the rationale, not negotiating tonight as you get into a development agreement with who's going to do what at some point in the future. I understand that still needs to be discussion yet to have with one or other developers, but they did stand out here as important intersections that are not going to do well even at the lower traffic level study.
And again, I think there are some barriers. That's why they just cannot offer that at this point in time.
Yeah, okay. And then it just caught my eye here on the other not offereds. There was a couple situations where it might have been associated with the Carytown Boulevard and I-40 ramps, I guess east and west, where there was some element of the required, the terminology is required per LDO and Cary Community Plan. Those are things that are going to be required. So does that mean the town of Cary is going to do those things? Or is that something that is?
I think that
by
the
the
terminology in that is the LDO, particularly in rezoning cases, when we do a traffic study, the LDO defines certain level of service thresholds for levels of congestion that we suggest be established. If the levels of congestion go beyond those minimum standards we've set, then they ought to, those mitigations should be identified. It's not that they're required to make those. Those are all strictly voluntary commitments to make those mitigation improvements. But most people will, developers will offer mitigations as improvements to help support their case. And that's the case with Fenton, is that they have identified quite a few intersections that they know that they have a significant impact to those intersections caused by this development, and they're willing to do their part to making those improvements.
But when I see a couple of these here with the required per LDO and Cary Community Plan, there's a check mark, but there's no offering or not offered on the part of the applicant associated with a couple of those. And so I just was curious if
There may be
if
some
they're blank right now.
offered. For instance, at East Chatham Street and Maynard Road, there was an improvement suggested by the traffic study be made. There is a state DOT project to improve that area. We're going to be putting a grade separated bridge crossing there that would affect that intersection. So that's going to get totally reconfigured by the state DOT. For them to do this improvement now would be basically having to tear it up in a few short years with the DOT.
Understandable. And there's a final question on that. I noticed there's a couple you mentioned here, going through all of these intersections, that another applicant has already volunteered in their rezoning to address. Can you explain to me how that sorts? We don't certainly want to do a widening of whatever twice.
Right.
One party does it, one party gets off the hook, I imagine.
Right.
How does that sort out?
So a couple ways. One is it's not uncommon for traffic studies from several different rezoning applicants have similar improvements that need to be made at a specific intersection. So many times they'll collaborate together. They'll put money together and do a joint project. We have had that happen. That's the best way to make things happen. But also there has been cases where one development was ready to proceed forward immediately with plans, and they do the improvement. Okay, and so we have had cases like that. Our hopes and desires are that both the IKEA and Fenton will come online very quickly, and those improvements will be made quickly. But again, if there are, I don't believe there's in too many circumstances where they've had similar improvements that will have to affect the traveling public twice by them doing an improvement and then another development coming back right behind on their heels and tearing it back up and doing something differently. That'll be well coordinated with all development that wants to do any improvement in that corridor.
Great. I appreciate your time. Your answers have been very, very helpful. And I tell you, the thing I had the most heartburn with, which you helped clarify, was regarding the uncertainty of the future and potential extra traffic associated with extra build-out is something you do anticipate having mechanisms in the development agreement to be able to, adjust accordingly as you go forward, despite the initial conditions for certain road improvements. Down the road, if we really want to go for the sky on more development, we'll have some way to go back and forth on additional road requirements if that may be necessary.
And I think, like I say, I think the development agreement that Russ talked about is a great vehicle for that.
Yeah, it's a great place for it. It's an unknown. So thank you I have confidence that you'll put the right wording in there. Thank you. That's it for me on that.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions they would like to ask of the staff or the applicant? If not, we're sitting at the 2-hour point here, I'd like to take a brief recess, like 5 minutes, but since we don't have a motion on the floor, I'm going to ask that you not talk to each other. We don't want any horse trading. So let's not talk to each other about this, or anybody in the staff or the applicant or anything like that while we're gone, okay? So let's just not discuss this at all. And we'll go for 5 minutes, and we will resume, and then if there's a motion to be had, we'll take that up immediately. All right, we're back now, and we will continue up with this agenda item. Since no one has any questions, at this point, we would have someone put a motion forward. And since we have a couple members who are new, and for those of you out here, once a motion's put forward, we'll discuss that. That's kind of the on-the-record portion of our deliberation. I would ask if anyone intends to vote against something that they give a little statement about why. That's something I like to keep track of. You don't have to say anything, but if you're going to vote no for something, I'd like to know that, and so we could hear it on the record. And the other thing is, if we're going to make any motions on, well, let me just see what happens first before I make any other comments. And then I'll just keep my mouth shut until then. So would anyone care to make a motion about this particular rezoning case?
I would like to. I move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 14 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval. That is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that motion?
I second.
Discussion, please. Mary Jo, kick us off.
Well, I think it's been stated by both staff and I think some of us, either directly or indirectly, that this seems to fulfill all the elements of what was originally conceived for the Eastern Cary Gateway. It's potentially very attractive. It certainly has all the height and the diversity of activities that are projected for this area, and there are controls in place, presumably, that will make sure that it would be developed in line with what has been proposed. So I'm comfortable that this meets what the Cary plan envisioned for this part of town.
Apologize for being redundant, but I appreciate the applicant's work and the town staff work. It's obvious that the Eastern Cary Gateway vision is a very robust vision. And the concerns that I had coming into it, crime, noise, traffic, anybody who comes to develop there is going to, I would have those same concerns. I think we have a procedure in place to mitigate as best we can any major issue that I have. And I think it's going to be, in the end, a great development.
Any other comments, discussion on this motion? Yes.
I think the new tool here around this development agreement changes the nature of our thinking and discussion about a rezoning, particularly one as important as this. I did come in here this evening with some real heartburn about traffic, and as you know, I expressed my concerns. But having a better appreciation of how the development agreement can be used here to deal with all of the admitted uncertainty as this development progresses over a period of time, and total build out and other modes of transportation that may or may not factor into here, I'm a lot more comforted. And my notion of a red light turned to a green light as I better understand how that development agreement could be applied here. I've got confidence in the staff and the whole team and the immense amount of effort's gone into this so far that it will continue regarding those issues, because a destination center that people can get it in and out of doesn't do anybody any good, of course. So I'm a green light now.
I'd like to thank the staff for all the work that's been done on this. It's an enormous amount of work that's gone into it, both on the community plan part and on this particular proposal. And I know the town's been looking at this property for some 30 years and have had all sorts of general ideas of how it might be developed. And I think this is what the town's been looking for a very long time. So I support it wholeheartedly.
Any discussion on this side of the room? Anything?
I would like to see some more consideration, because we've been talking about it for a while, about the affordable housing and the age restriction. But knowing what we're trying to do in this area, just the revitalization of the area, I like it. I think that everybody wants a Wegmans. So I just wish that there was a little bit more thought into the age restriction and the affordable housing, because I truly believe that it really makes sense to have it around the destination centers. And I don't want to see us kick it down to the next applicant, because then what if it never happens? We need to make sure that we're providing housing options for all of Cary citizens.
I appreciate how hard the staff has worked and all the effort, both on the staff as well as council, as well as the applicant. I recognize it's a great opportunity site. It's one of the largest greenfield sites, and I'm just hopeful that this will be a catalyst to see some of the other elements of the Imagine Cary plan come together to fruition for the site, and that this is the start of continuing and working on some of the other aspects of the plan that aren't being addressed.
Yes, I want to start by saying that I really think that this is a great plan. Staff alluded to this early in the presentation, and that really what the Eastern Gateway Care Plan is looking for is a regional draw. And I think in that regard, this plan nailed it. One of the words that I heard thrown out in this discussion that actually I'm not used to hearing in rezoning is the word flexibility. And that's something that I think both the applicant and staff had mentioned several times. And reading through the staff report, I did notice a lot of places where the applicant is given a fair amount of flexibility in making decisions and kind of building and developing kind of how they want to. Normally, I think that could be a good thing. It also leads to uncertainty, but I think in regard to this case, being as we have over 100 conditions, we have this development agreement, which is something we're not used to having. I think that flexibility or any issues pertaining to that are well managed, and I really look forward to seeing what the final product's going to look like. Two of the areas that I really like about this plan are, first of all, the increase in the community gathering. In the staff report alluded that there's almost 2 acres in this 91-acre development that's proposed to be part of community gathering, and I think that's great. I think that's really going to kind of set the stage and enhance the development. The thing that I really like the most about this is the vertical mixed use, and I like how staff has helped to kind of tweak the plan to really put forward that idea. That's something that I think we need more of in Cary. I really think that vertical mixed use is something that's going to help us achieve our 2040 dream and really some of those goals that are in the Imagine Cary plan. And I really like that the emphasis that is placed on vertical mixed use as part of this development. The only really nagging issue that I have here is the traffic mitigations that are not being offered at the Carytown Boulevard and Maynard intersection. I'm obviously not going to derail a great plan for that one thing, but that is one thing that I would hope that the council would take and work through the development agreement with the applicant on trying to address that. Just looking at the numbers that were provided in the traffic impact report, I really think that that's something that's going to bottleneck and that's going to blow up, and that more effort should be put on dealing with that. But overall, I think it's a great plan. I think it addressed the needs of the Eastern Cary Gateway, and I'm definitely in support of it.
And I echo a lot of what Ryan said with the vertical mixed use. The use, the content of this thing, I think is really well done. It's what we need. It fits this area. I also lean, as those who've watched these things before, more on the process side too. And there's 800 acres in this entire thing, and we're doing 92 tonight. And like we said, that this has been many years in the making. Just think about this. There was these development ideas that came through, and in the meantime, we're developing this community plan that kind of flips our old way of doing things in comprehensive plans on its head. And so now we modify this to fit that, and the plan also identifies this area as an integral part of the overall Cary vision, and those two things have to kind of shift and move. And from someone who goes to neighborhood meetings and sees a plan put forward by an applicant and the community get involved, and then months later see something that's quite often completely different, that's the result of all of this working back and forth and modification and negotiation and consult with the staff to get something that's really workable by the time it comes to us. To see that on steroids here, on a magnificent scale, a huge scale, to have that come, the effort has got to be applauded on everybody's part to make this happen. With that said, I really want this process to work. I want the development agreement to work because we've got 708 more acres to go. And if this flexible, everybody working together idea doesn't work, then we're going to have to lock stuff down harder and go with more traditional rezonings later on, and that's not going to be nearly as beneficial. So I really hope this process works as it goes through. And with that said, I'm clearly going to support this. Does anyone else have any other thing? Well, with that in mind, then, would all those in favor of 17 REZ 14 please say aye? Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries unanimously. And it will then appear on the town's consent agenda for council, and we'll take it from there. Thank you to all the staff members who showed up and presented with us today. It was, for those of you can't see, there's a room full of staff with us tonight, and I appreciate all their efforts. I believe that is the end of our agenda for this evening, so if someone would like to make a motion to adjourn. Yes?
I would like to insert one question. As we discussed in our work session.
Excuse me 1 second, folks.
As we discussed in our recent work session, we would inquire with staff whether or not they anticipate a work session being necessary to be scheduled for the following month. So this is our regular session. Work session will occur third week of January. It's already on the calendar. Do you anticipate that we're going to need that, or may that be canceled right now? Again, this is consistent with our discussion, work session, for those of you who recall.
So thank you, Mr. Varney, for the question. And I'm getting a signal from staff as there's a potential LDO Act amendment that may be forthcoming. And so right now we would say we're still on for January. I believe that's the 29th, I believe.
Other way around, yeah.
No, the meeting's going to be the 22nd and the work session is 29th.
The work session's 29th, right?
They're switched for this month.
Okay.
Right, yeah. P&Z meeting 22nd, work session 29th, and what we're saying is there's a potential for an LDO Act amendment for the 29th, the work session on the 29th.
Okay, so we will have a work session.
As we stand today, and if something turns, as soon as if something changes, then we'll let you know as soon as possible, but we should plan on it today.
Good catch. Yep. Anything else? Then my invitation for a motion to adjourn is still out there.
So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So we've got 3 motions to adjourn. I guess we don't need a second on that. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you and good evening.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.